Today I want to respond to 6 questions that I've gotten about Edelbrock carburetors, operation, and tuning. Not complicated, but some things we haven't talked about before. So let's get started. This question came from somebody that's breaking the accelerator pump assemblies. Now these are pretty durable. They are plastic in the main rod here, but unless you've got something severely wrong, you won't break these. These will last for quite a long time. I very rarely have to change these out when doing a rebuild on either one of these types of carburetors, but they do have some issues if you are has some things a little bit wrong. So I'm going to show you the 2 little reasons why you would be breaking this accelerator pump assembly. This first issue is the most common of the 2, but it's one you see very frequently when these carburetors are disassembled or rebuilt. If you're doing any tuning and you take the top of these off, maybe make some adjustments, do some disassembly on the main air horn or on the air horn assembly, this is pretty common. If you look at the clips that tie the accelerator pump to the accelerator pump arm here, they are specific in the way they're supposed to go. So there's an easy way to tell if you've got this correct. If the clip is in a S pattern, then it is on there correctly. This one on this black AVS2 is on the S pattern and it is on there correctly. If you look at this one, it's on backwards, it's in a Z pattern. If it's in a Z pattern, the pump assembly is going to cock every time this arm transitions, and you could end up having issues. Now you can cycle this very freely when it's on the bench, that's not the issue, but as soon as you add fuel to this and a situation where you are putting pressure on this and it can hydraulic and lock itself a little bit as you're trying to force it through the nozzle and through the system here, you can put a lot of pressure on there. The clip tends to bend it and it will snap that accelerator pump off, usually down below just a little bit, but it'll hit it right here at the top and it'll break very, very frequently. So just verify that you've got that clip on there correctly. It looks like an S and not like a Z. Let's take a little bit closer look at these clips. Now again, if it's in the S style pattern, it is in there correctly. You can tell that these have a little bit of a bend to them. That bend is there again to make sure that the angle is correctly, so when the accelerator assembly actuates and pushes down on the accelerator pump, that it hits it at the right angle going down, and that way it will keep it straight in the bore and not put any of that side to side or actually front to back stress on there that would cause that plastic to break. So when you look at these, it's a pretty good indication to pay attention to which way it goes in there. S is correct, Z is incorrect. This next one can be a little frustrating and discouraging to track down, but what do you do when your carburetor whistles? That's kind of interesting. Let's take a look at this, but I'm going to show you on the GMC what to look for. Now there's 2 really common things that could occur here, and I'm going to show you each one of them individually. The first one that's fairly common is the gasket that goes between the carburetor and the base of the air cleaner. Now I see a lot of folks throw this out, not run it. You really should. That is what it's designed to do, is to keep the air cleaner and the carburetor sealed up, keeps the garbage and dirt and dust out of there. If you don't run this, you run into a strong chance of getting that whistling condition. If this gasket is torn, broken, old, and brittle, and it's gotten some air gap in there that allows the air to seep past it, very, very strong chance that you're going to get that whistling sound out of the air cleaner gasket. It's easily the #1 situation that causes that. The second one, and not so common, is the gasket that goes between the carburetor and, in this case, the spacer that's on there. But if you're directly carbureted to the intake manifold, I've seen that as well too, where the air horn assembly or air cleaner gasket is good, but that you have a tear or again, a brittle or old gasket that is seeping air past it here. I've seen these where this spacer or intake is a little warped and it's not, carburetor's not sitting on there straight. If you have that situation, that again will cause that as well too. So make sure the carburetor's bolted down properly. Run a file along the bottom of the carburetor and along the top of the intake manifold. If it's not making marks across the whole surface, you don't have to take a lot of material. You're not using a really aggressive file. Just something so you can check the surface and flatness of it. You can try a straight edge. There's a number of different ways you can verify that. But I've seen that one a little less frequently. The air cleaner gasket is typical to have it. So if you have that whistling condition, start there. You can always try the old carb cleaner trick, but get the air cleaner on and get it all tightened down where you'd have it in operation. Try it then. Always be careful. You're dealing with the distributor right there or in front on a Ford or a Mopar, so just be careful spraying carburetor willy-nilly. You don't want to catch the thing on fire. One last little one on the whistling side of things. If you're using an adapter plate to mount a square bore carburetor to a spread bore intake, sometimes you will run into that issue. Now, it's not the adapter's fault. There's a lot of different styles of carburetors, and all these little runners and ports and everything on the bottom side is a little bit different. But if you're running that adapter plate, there's another little plate that you can run in conjunction with it that will help seal up that bottom side. I know it seems redundant using multiple adapter plates, but if you're going to keep the spread bore intake manifold and adapt it to a square bore carburetor, sometimes you're going to run into that issue where this will whistle when it leaks. Here's one that can be pretty annoying, but it's also pretty easy, and you get a lot of people that want to argue with you about the electric choke, how to hook it up, where to hook up. But one thing that some folks will notice is that the electric choke won't open all the way. If that is the case and it's not completely straight up and down on the choke plate there's a reason why, and I get this very frequently. Well, I hooked up my choke to a coil, it's key on hot. I hooked it up to the alternator, it only gets power on when it's running. I've hooked it up to a resistor because it's getting power constantly. There's a very specific set of places where you can hook up that electric choke, and if you do not have it hooked up there, if you've got it to a coil or somewhere else, the chances of you running into poor operation on the electric choke is extremely strong. So always follow the recommendations on where to hook that choke up to. I've done a couple of videos on those and where to hook that power up specifically to give you some ideas of where you can pull it from and where not to pull it from. If you do that, don't wonder why the choke isn't opening up all the way. It's because it doesn't have enough voltage to get it pulled open. The other side of that is the fast idle cam. Now, if it is not set properly, you will run into those instances where it will hang itself open or it will get stuck on the throttle. Something will occur that is going to bind this up. So again, the fast idle side of it's very, very simple. It's easy. There's a single adjustment on the bottom side to control the speed of it here. All you need to do is just make sure it operates correctly. As long as it does and you go to wide open throttle and you've got power to the choke and it's warmed up and it pulls completely off, then you're in good shape. If it doesn't and you can't get it to operate that way, just make sure that the pin isn't bound up. You've got don't have the clip in there wrong, or I've seen people try to put this choke rod on the other way and it gets kind of fouled up. I've seen people try to tighten that down because they're trying to control a vacuum leak or something. I'm not going to try to pretend to understand why people do what they do, but just try to make sure that operates correctly. If it does, your chances of getting that choke to open up all the way increase. Another common question I get asked, and unfortunately, with all of the information that's out there, people still make this mistake over and over and over again. They've got a 305 Chevy or a small cubic inch engine. They put an 800 CFM or 850 CFM carburetor on. They don't understand why they can't tune it, get it to work properly. I can't help you when you've made a very poor carburetor choice. I've got a good video on how to choose the size of the carburetor, whether it's a 500, whether it's one of these 650s, whether it's an 800. You've got to make that right choice first. If you don't, you're going to always struggle with, overfueling, underfueling, not being able to tune it, not being able to get it to idle, and having stumbles and all of those little situations that people constantly complain about when they're talking about these types of carburetors and how they're trying to tune through an issue. Sometimes the issue cannot be tuned through. You've made a poor choice and there's nothing you can do to change that. You cannot tune CFM. It will not change. It is still going to demand what the carburetor demands. This one is a 500 CFM carburetor. It needs a certain amount of air to go through there and the speed to pull the fuel through the booster to get the main metering circuit to work. If the engine isn't commanding that, the carburetor's not going to respond to it. So if you put a 650 or a 750 on a stock 305, I promise you're going to have issues with it every single time. And again, you can tune a little bit of that out, but you're always going to be over delivering a little bit of fuel. And again, the problem is we have to also understand that airspeed and vacuum in the engine and what it is trying to pull through the venturi is a big part of it. If the carburetor is too big and you can't get that airspeed through that venturi, it doesn't matter what you do. You are not going to be able to pull the right amount of fuel for the amount of air that is going through there. They don't universally offset each other. They're always going to be struggling with it, and you'll never tune your way out of that. So understanding the application and getting the carburetor to the right size is so extremely important. And again, they're a little bit different. You may have a 351 cubic inch Ford engine that is in a four-wheel drive truck, and you may have that same cubic inch engine that is in a fastback Mustang. Probably they're going to ask for different ways of delivering that fuel and air. That could be on the Mustang. You may want to go to a 650 or a 750, maybe even an 800, depending on the cam profile, the compression, what other components or pieces are with that, whether it's a bigger intake manifold or one that fits the cam profile. All of those things come into play. And maybe that Windsor motor that's in the four-wheel drive truck or that off-road vehicle is only operating up to 4,500 RPM at the most out on the trail. You could probably get away with a 600, maybe even a 500, depending on what that engine is set up for. Exact same cubic inch engine, but totally different in how they're used. So I know we've talked about this quite a bit. You've got to get the right size carburetor. If you don't, your power's probably going to be a little down. If you've ever asked a carburetor tech question on any one of the forums or on my YouTube channel, one thing that I will always almost instantly ask you is where's your timing set at? And I get a lot of argument with that of, well, we're not talking about timing. I'm talking about a carburetor issue and why I can't get it to tune right. And getting the timing set correctly, I can't tell you how many issues this solves to get this set correctly and to start using it as part of your tuning process. If you don't do that, you're going to always be at a disadvantage. Now, I get also a lot with that as well, the timing set right. Okay, well, tell me what it is. And I know people are getting frustrated with that, but I've got to know where you're set at because, again, if we go back to the GMC truck out there of mine, if I followed the factory setting on the timing, it would be set at 6 to 8 degrees before top dead center. That is not enough timing with today's fuel. You need to run, I run at a minimum of 12. 12 to 18 is where the range that I usually go to. Now I'm just a couple hundred feet above sea level. That may vary for you depending on what part of the country or the world you're in and the elevation that you're at, but that is typically where I almost always start down here around sea level is around 12 degrees. Now, why is that? Again, it's because the fuel quality is so poor. You need a little bit more time to burn that, and if you don't give the engine that time, that 6 or 8 degrees before top dead center is not enough timing. You need to throw some more timing at it. I will usually start to throw a little bit more at it to see how it performs. Does it pick up a little bit better? Does it drive a little bit nicer? Do those dead spots kind of go away? Will it still start okay? Does it have any knocks or pings or detonation? As long as you can find that happy spot, you're good. Now, once you set the timing, you are not done with it. If you start to make tuning adjustments to the carburetor, you need to periodically go back and adjust the timing and see if it will make any difference. If you add more fuel because you're trying to get a little bit more performance out of the carburetor, try adding a little bit more timing to go along with it. If you set it at 12 and wow, it's starting and running and driving nicely, and now that we're adding more fuel, it's kind of bogging a little bit, maybe I should take some back. Before you take the fuel away, add some timing to it and see where it is. This whole process of tuning is, especially when you're talking about fuel and spark, they have to be done together, and there's never one that's set and it's done. You've got to kind of balance it out and find a happy medium. So timing is a huge factor that people really overlook, and it's probably the number one thing that causes a lot of the carburetor issues I have: bad timing. The last fun one that I get, and it should be pretty obvious, but sometimes it isn't, is folks ask, my oil smells like fuel. Why is that? Well, the carburetor's flooding. The carburetor's allowing too much fuel through it. So there's a couple of things you can check with that. Make sure your fuel pressure isn't set too high. Again, for whatever reason, I don't understand it, but people always want to argue with me telling them that adding a regulator is a good idea in a system that's analog that doesn't have a lot of adjustment points. Well, it doesn't need a regulator. I've got a stock pump, or I have a Holly pump that's set between 4 and 6.5 psi. Doesn't matter. Get a pressure regulator. Every situation is different. Sometimes tuning down or changing the pressure to match the situation you're in is the best thing you can do for that carburetor. So pressure is always the first one. That's the first one to check. Second one is obvious in the needle and seats and the float level. If the floats are set too high, or you've got one that maybe is a little too high, it could pull fuel into the booster and pull it into the carburetor and add more unburnt fuel to the engine and causing some issues. So float level, needle and seat, all real common stuff that should be just part of your tuning process when you're looking for why there's fuel in the oil. Last one on the flooding side we just covered in a video a couple weeks ago is with the floats themselves. If you're running a standard brass type of float, just make sure it doesn't have any liquid in it. If you shut the carburetor off and it's a couple of days before you get back to look at it, you can do the test that we did in that video to see if there's any liquid that is making it past the seams, or there's a pinhole in that brass float. So check that video out and you can take a look at some things to test out, but that's a good one to look at too. If the float's too heavy and it's always hanging the needle open, it's going to continuously push fuel into the carburetor. So you may have the level set correctly and the drop set correctly, but if you've got a hole, or if that float is collecting fuel, you're going to run into issues. One last word on fuel and oil. If you check your oil and it smells like fuel, it's time to change the oil. I don't care if you've only put 100 miles on that oil change, or if you've got, just a couple hours on it, whatever. It's time to change it. Fuel breaks down the additive package in there. It destroys the properties of the oil, and it's not good to you anymore. So regardless of the expense of it, go ahead and change the oil and the filter. Get fresh, clean fluid or oil in there, and that way you can kind of start over. Once you correct the problem, it shouldn't be any issue. But anytime your fuel or oil smells like fuel, it's time to change your oil. Well, I hope you found some of those useful, and if you're running into those issues, hopefully some of the suggestions to correct it will help you out. Again, none of this is complicated, but sometimes we all get stuck in a little bit of a rut where we're doing the exact same thing over and over to try to cure a problem, and then we get confused with why it's not doing anything. It's just because you need to try something else. So check some of those out, see if it can help you. Again, all of those are just little things that some of them are annoyances, some of it's a little tip, and some of them are extremely critical when it comes to timing. If you have any questions on this one, don't hesitate. Please leave them down below. I'll try to answer all the questions that come in on the channel. Sometimes that's hard to do, and I miss a few. If you want, you can check us out on Instagram, and we have a Facebook group now, so if you want to run over there, drop pictures of your projects. Absolutely love seeing all the things that you all are working on instead of just seeing the junk I'm working on. So anyway, that's it. We'll catch you guys on the next one. We'll see you.